Chapter 3, Part 4. For animals, here is only a habitat with which they enter into contact. For people, here signifies not merely a physical space, but also an historical space. Strictly speaking, here, now, there, tomorrow, and yesterday do not exist for the animal whose life, lacking self-consciousness, is totally determined. Animals cannot surmount the limits imposed by the here, the now, or the there. Humans, however, because they are aware of themselves and thus of the world, because they are conscious beings, exist in a dialectical relationship between the determination of limits and their own freedom. As they separate themselves from the world, which they objectify, as they separate themselves from their own activity, as they locate the seat of their decisions in themselves and in their relations with the world and others, people overcome the situations which limit them. The limit situations. Once perceived by individuals as fetters, as obstacles to their liberation, these situations stand out in relief from the background, revealing their true nature as concrete historical dimensions of a given reality. Men and women respond to the challenge with actions which Vieira Pinto calls limit acts, those directed at negating and overcoming rather than passively accepting the given. Thus it is not the limit situations in and of themselves which create a climate of hopelessness, but rather how they are perceived by women and men at a given historical moment, whether they appear as fetters or as insurmountable barriers. As critical perception is embodied in action, a climate of hope and confidence develops, which leads men to attempt to overcome the limit situations. This objective can be achieved only through action upon the concrete historical reality in which limit situations historically are found. As reality is transformed and these situations are superseded, new ones will appear, which in turn will evoke new limit acts. The prop world of animals contains no limit situations, due to its ahistorical character. Similarly, animals lack the ability to exercise limit acts, which require a decisive attitude towards the world, separation from and objectification of the world in order to transform it. Organically bound to their prop, animals do not distinguish between themselves and the world. Accordingly, animals are not limited by limit situations, which are historical, but rather by the entire prop. And the appropriate role for animals is not to relate to their prop, in that event the prop would be a world, but to adapt to it. Thus, when animals produce a nest, a hive, or a burrow, they are not creating products which result from limit acts, that is, transforming responses. Their productive activity is subordinated to the satisfaction of a physical necessity which is simply stimulating, rather than challenging. An animal's product belongs immediately to its physical body, whilst man freely confronts his product. Only products which result from the activity of a being but do not belong to its physical body, though these products may bear its seal, can give a dimension of meaning to the context, which thus becomes a world. A being capable of such production, who thereby is necessarily aware of himself, is a being for himself, could no longer be if she or he were not in the process of being in the world with which he or she relates, just as the world would no longer exist if this being did not exist. The difference between animals who, because their activity does not constitute limit acts, cannot create products detached from themselves, and humankind, who through their action upon the world create the realm of culture and history, is that only the latter are beings of the praxis. Only human beings are praxis, the praxis which, as the reflection and action which truly transform reality, is the source of knowledge and creation. Animal activity, which occurs without a praxis, is not creative. People's transforming activity is. It is as transforming and creative beings that humans, in their permanent relations with reality, produce not only material goods, tangible objects, but also social institutions, ideas, and concepts. Through their continuing praxis, men and women simultaneously create history and become historical social beings. Because, in contrast to animals, people can tri-dimensionalize time into the past, the present, and the future. Their history, in function of their own creations, develops as a constant process of transformation within which epochal units materialize. These epochal units are not closed periods of time, static compartments within which people are confined. Were this the case, a fundamental condition of history, its continuity, would disappear. On the contrary, epochal units interrelate in the dynamics of historical continuity. An epoch is characterized by a complex of ideas, concepts, hopes, doubts, values, and challenges in dialectical interaction with their opposites, striving towards plenitude. The concrete representation of many of these ideas, values, concepts, and hopes, as well as the obstacles which impede the people's full humanization, constitute the themes of that epoch. These themes imply others which are not opposing or even antithetical. They also indicate tasks to be carried out and fulfilled. Thus, historical themes are never isolated, independent, disconnected, or static. They are always interacting dialectically with their opposites. Nor can these themes be found anywhere except in the human-world relationship. The complex of interacting themes of an epoch constitutes its thematic universe. Confronted by this universe of themes, in dialectical contradiction, persons take equally contradictory positions. Some work to maintain the structures, others to change them. As antagonism deepens between themes which are the expression of reality, there is a tendency for the themes and for reality itself to be mythicized, establishing a climate of irrationality and sectarianism. This climate threatens to drain themes of their deeper significance and to deprive them of their characteristically dynamic aspect. In such a situation, myth-creating irrationality itself becomes a fundamental theme. Its opposing theme, the critical and dynamic view of the world, strives to unveil reality, unmask its mythization, and achieve a full realization of the human task, the permanent transformation of reality in favor of the liberation of people. In the last analysis, the themes both contain and are contained in limit situations. The tasks they imply require limit acts. When the themes are concealed by the limit situations and thus are not clearly perceived, the corresponding tasks, people's responses in the form of historical action, can be neither authentically nor critically fulfilled. In this situation, humans are unable to transcend the limit situations to discover that beyond these situations, and in contradiction to them, lies an untested feasibility. In sum, limit situations imply the existence of persons who are directly or indirectly served by these situations, and of those who are negated and curbed by them. Once the latter come to perceive these situations as the frontier between being and being more human, rather than the frontier between being and nothingness, they begin to direct their increasingly critical actions toward achieving the untested feasibility implicit in that perception. On the other hand, those who are served by the present limit situation regard the untested feasibility as a threatening limit situation which must not be allowed to materialize, and act to maintain the status quo. Consequently, liberating actions upon an historical milieu must correspond not only to the generative themes, but to the way in which these themes are perceived. This requirement, in turn, implies another, the investigation of meaningful thematics. End of Chapter 3, Part 4.